Hello and good evening, I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, our guest tonight is Ustaz Dr Nurul Haq Shahrir, a consultant on religion for the United Nations in Malaysia. The time of Ramadan and Shawwal is often a time that Muslims come together at mosques and homes, but this year it's been quite different, and perhaps this period of social distancing will allow for opportunities for Muslims to reflect on how the pandemic has tested their faith. So welcome to the show, Ustaz. Assalamualaikum. Thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, now in the early stages of the pandemic, Ustaz, some Muslims had argued that COVID was created by God to warn and punish humanity for its sins, and that this meant that fighting the pandemic was futile and that Muslims should rely on God to protect the righteous. Now, Ustaz, how do you see the balance between, say, precaution towards the pandemic, but also a reliance on God?
Okay, one thing here is that our world is facing a great danger that threatens the lives of millions of people around the world due to the growing spread of the coronavirus pandemic. Okay, while we reaffirm the role of medicine and scientific research in fighting this pandemic, we should not forget to seek refuge in God Almighty as we face this severe crisis. And I call people around the world, especially in Malaysia, to pray, to observe fast, and to do good deeds to end this pandemic. And yes, it has been interpreted by some as a punishment from God, but let's not do God's job here. Okay. We are here.
Yeah, it seems very interesting that, you know, this pandemic is just one of many instances where some people of a religious turn of mind interpret natural phenomena like earthquakes and tsunamis, in this case a pandemic, as something that comes from outside their sphere of control. They attribute it to God, or they give moral judgments on it. I mean, is there a mindset issue here, this unwillingness to see natural phenomena as natural phenomena, wanting to attribute religious meaning to these events?
Well, Malaysians generally are very religious-oriented, so it comes naturally that everything that is happening, especially the coronavirus pandemic, people would try to attribute the fears, the insecurity to God. That is something natural. But we should take it positively. I mean, as people of faith, let us beseech God, the Almighty. Instead of blaming Him, we beseech Him to safeguard the entire world, to help us to overcome this pandemic, to restore security, stability, prosperity, so that once this pandemic crisis is over, our world may become a better place for humanity and for human fraternity than ever before.
Ustaz, I'm just wondering, what are some of the conversations that you're hearing within the faith community that have been sparked by the current pandemic? What is the faith community looking at, focused on, and talking about?
Okay, they are talking. One of the concerns is that they see this the implementation of the MCO is suspension, is the what they call this violation of religious rights and freedom. Okay, it is not. Okay, it's not a violation of religious liberty. And to argue otherwise puts life at risk, because we are a people of faith and reason, and that heeding the government's orders to suspend religious services is eminently reasonable, and it does not in any way attack or undermine our faith. Okay, and this includes the suspension of Friday prayers, which currently are still being suspended in some states. Even in Kuala Lumpur, the dispensation to perform Friday prayers are limited to not more than 30 people. Okay, and rest be assured that this suspension is in line with our religious virtues and teachings, because it hinges upon the threat to life. Okay, and in Islam, whenever there is strong assumption that your life is in danger, if you are engaged in certain activities, especially in any forms of ritual, then you are dispensed from performing that ritual. As long as the fear factors remain, the suspension should stay.
Ustaz, I want to ask you about the fact that that these feelings are prevalent, that, you know, people, and this is not just among Muslims, it's many faith communities around the world. We've seen fundamentalist Christian preachers arguing against sensible public health responses and so on and so forth. I mean, it's not unique for, you know, these responses or these reactions to the public health directives. But where does it come from? Is it a lack of understanding of science? Is it a reliance on religious authorities, the specific leaders that are saying, ignore government, do what you think is important? Where is this dissent coming from?
I would say the fervor to the religious fervor. For example, the Catholics, the communion on tongue, they give the communion on tongue. Some of my Catholic friends, they express their dissatisfaction because they normally receive the communion on tongue instead of hand, and because of this pandemic and this MCO, this restriction, they can no longer receive the body of the Lord appropriately. So I believe this is something to do not just mindset, but is the religious fervor that is deep-seated inside one's soul. Okay, the current MCO imposition make that the spiritual nourishment is somehow restricted. So that could be the contributing factors.
All right, Ustaz, we're going to ask you to stay on the line for a little bit. We're going to take a quick break and continue this conversation in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned to Consider This. Hello, if you've just joined us, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kuttan. We're speaking to Ustaz Dr Nurul Haq Shahrir, a consultant on religion for the United Nations in Malaysia. Ustaz, I want to come back to something you said a little bit earlier about how all the changes, particularly within the congregations for prayers, Friday prayers, Tarawih prayers, Eid prayers, all of that is not a violation of religious rights, of religious liberty, you say. But surely we must address the anxiety among Muslims over the changes in the way they've been practicing the religion. I'm not just talking about congregational prayers, but also, in the azan, in the call for prayer, in, online akad nikah solemnization for marriage. So all these things are coming into the forefront with, social distancing because of the pandemic. Can you talk to us a little bit about addressing some of the anxiety that Muslims may be feeling at this point in time?
Okay, the anxiety, you mentioned online nikah. Okay?
One of the many anxieties.
Yeah, the anxiety is that most of the Muslims believe that such nikahs conducted online is invalid. That is what is being discussed at the grassroots level. So this kind of anxiety creates fear, and somehow it creates resistance, even though there is a fatwa issued on the permissibility of online nikah. So we need to address this fear. We need to address, by we, I mean the religious authorities. They need to address the fear. They need to inform the public, okay, on the validity and on the legitimacy of online nikah.
Ustaz, sorry to interrupt you. I'm just wondering, in not addressing that fear and the anxiety at the grassroots level, is that breeding distrust towards the religious authorities, towards religious leaders?
I would say there is a general mistrust. That what has been conveyed to me, and because of this mistrust, they disregard the fatwa.
Yeah, Ustaz, I want to come back to maybe what is underscoring this, which is the question of innovation. That in some religious traditions, innovations are to custom and ritual are actually viewed with suspicion rather than embrace. I mean, in the modern world mindset, innovation is a great thing. It's a positive. It's progress. But perhaps in some religious traditions and in some other belief systems, innovation is actually a bad thing. It's something to be resisted. It's a deviation from the original truth. What is the balance between innovation, which what clearly all these examples are about, and holding on to the essence of what was in the tradition or in the rituals?
Some people, they view innovation as a form of heresy. Okay? But these need to be corrected that only in innovation that violates the religious principles and tenets that fall into such category of heresy. Any innovation in terms of ritual that does not encroach on tenets, doctrines, and established dogma, it is acceptable and it cannot be argued as a heresy or as a form of deviation from the original truth. So this understanding must be made available to the general public. It must be taught that not all innovations are bad. Some innovations are acceptable. There are some innovations that are not acceptable, especially when it encroaches upon the established religious tenets and doctrines.
Right. Ustaz, you said that religious authorities should be addressing these anxieties with clear communication to explain to Muslims why these changes have taken place or have been called for. What would you say to those with anxiety about all these changes?
First of all, it is understandable that people will fear something that is they are not used to that thing. I mean, if something is new being introduced to you, something foreign, you will take that thing as with apprehension. That is understandable, but there is no reason to reject the fatwa that has been issued for a simple reason that it has been discussed at the national level, the National Fatwa Council, and it has been agreed upon. And it's not a blanket approval. It is there are certain conditions that must be met for online nikah to be licit and valid. So once these things are clearly communicated to the public, they are made known to the public at large, I believe this anxiety and fear will be able to be mitigated.
Okay.
Ustaz, I want to understand, the Malaysian situation when it comes to the faith community. What level of open discussion is allowed? Because, different traditions are either very centralized in their notion of what is dogma, what is orthodoxy, what is heterodox. In other traditions, it's much more dispersed. In Malaysia, is authority dispersed or is it very centralized? Where do people go to find their truths? Is it in central authority or in their local religious leaders?
Okay, I'm talking about the Muslims here because the Christians are quite clear, especially the Catholic. They have the magisterium, the Pope. For Muslims, we have our central authority would be our state mufti. Because in the state constitution, it says that the mufti is the second person. I mean, the chief authority of Islam after the Yang di-Pertuan Agong or after the Sultan of the state. So, as far as Islam is concerned, we have our central authority in the form of in the person of the mufti. So, Muslims should refer to the state mufti. Should they wish to seek any clarification and decisive answer on any religious issue.
Ustaz, what role then does the local religious leader play, the imams, the head of the masjid? What role do they play during this time, in this pandemic?
To make sure that whatever they are teaching the public, whatever they are telling the public is in line with the fatwa already pronounced by the mufti. And it has to, the religious leaders, the imams, the bilal, the toksiat, whatsoever, they must make sure that they must know whether this fatwa has been gazetted, has been legislated at state level. That means it is enforced and carries the power of the force of law, or whether the fatwa has not been gazetted. It is only advisory on religious matters. So they must equip themselves with this knowledge in order to relate and to be relevant to their community.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. More with Dr. Nurul in just a few minutes. Stay tuned to consider this. Thank you so much for staying with us on Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me, Sharaad Kuttan. Now,
try to adjust my soko.
Just in time, just after the break.
Okay.
Let's continue our conversation with Ustaz Dr Nurul Haq Shahrir, a consultant on religion for the United Nations in Malaysia. Ustaz, I want to talk to you a little bit about observing Ramadan, and now that we're in the month of Shawwal, how that's changed for Muslims. I mean, what have been some of your observations in the way that the pandemic and the lockdown has changed Ramadan and Shawwal?
Well, first of all, our rituals have been somehow restricted, and we have to amend, we have to adapt to the restrictions, and I'm afraid that we have to adapt this for a very long time. It's not going to end for the next 6 months. From what I've read, it will stay at least for 2 years. So we have to get used to this new norms, and the Prime Minister call it. And I think it is a good practice because it teaches us to be patient, and it teaches me to be patient, and somehow it inculcates discipline, and it teaches us not to be selfish in a way that there must be give and take. We need to understand that the restriction on religious practices does not apply only on Muslims, but it involves people of all faiths, and it involves the lives of people at large. So it teaches humility, and to me, it teaches to go back to the original teachings of Islam. For example, when you pay zakat fitrah over the counter, the customary practice of shaking hands, which has nothing to do with the ritual of paying zakat. And people now they realize that, oh, we don't have to shake our hands. Yes, Islam doesn't require that. Even when during the akad nikah, you are not required to shake the hands of the qadi or the wali. See? So the original teachings of Islam are being brought to life through MCO. Mm-hmm. So it's good to know that that awareness are being created by this imposition of movement control order.
I guess, Ustaz, there are a lot of cultural accretions on religious values and principles that you talk about, right? The shaking hands might not be particularly religious or compliant, Sharia compliant, but it might harken back to the way in which society is and how people are. And, Malaysians and Malay society, very demonstrative, open, warm, intimate in their relationships with each other. So maybe it's a cultural dimension. But I want to ask you, actually, a question about the future, Ustaz, which has to do with how the faith community relates to all of creation, if you like to use the religious expression, or the planet and the environment, which has come into sharp relief because of the pandemic. What we're doing to the planet. Do you think Muslims are going to engage with that question? At least Muslim thinkers engage with the question of the planet and the environmental crisis that the pandemic is clearly part of.
Yeah. At the international level, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar has signed a document on human fraternity with Pope Francis. It was last year, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the aspects of mentioned in document is being considered in document is Pope Francis Laudato Si. If you aware of the document, it talks about taking care of the creation and Mother Nature. So I believe that there is something good will come from this document, and even Pope Francis has recently urged believers of all faiths, and with the blessings of the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, Dr. Ahmad Tayyib, to hold a day of common prayer for MCO on 14th of May. Day of common prayer for COVID-19 on the 14th of May. And Mother Nature, our future, our fraternity is one of the. The aspects that are documented in the document that was signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar. Right. So let's hope that this would help to how shall I say it, to influence the faithful community worldwide, to make the world a better place for humanity and human fraternity.
Okay, in the last minute or so that we have left, Ustaz, I would like to hear your message to everyone watching tonight, Muslim or non-Muslim, practicing or otherwise, what you would like us to reflect on in terms of, at this time, patience and sacrifice, very much the DNA of Islam, but what would you like us to, what message would you like to leave us with tonight on the show?
Okay, what I'm going to say that we are not going to deny the medicine and scientific research, whether you are a believer or not, or whether you are practicing Muslim or not. This is the time for us to reflect and to turn to the Creator, to ask Him to rescue ourselves and the entire world from this adversity, to inspire scientists to find cure for the virus and to save the whole world from the health, economic, and human repercussions of this serious pandemic.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. Ustaz, appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts and insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me, Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for this evening. Selamat Hari Raya, everyone. Have a good one. Thank you so much for watching and good night.